I'm Charlie O'Donnell from Next NYC. For those of you who haven't met, who's new to a Next NYC event? Awesome, that's cool. And so Next NYC is basically a community events platform that comes out of what used to be the Brooklyn Bridge Ventures venture fund that I ran. I stopped investing about a year and a half ago, so no pitches, please. Just not any commissions. And a lot of folks were like, hey, what's going to happen to all of the events that you run? And so I said, well, I sure as hell can't pay for them. So I would like to introduce you to our sponsors who make this possible. So obviously we are here at Cooley, and do we want to...
The Cooley Red.
You're on brand.
I'm on brand today. Hi, I'm Charlotte Jeff Crater. I'm a business development leader at Cooley. Welcome to our office in New York. We're across the country and international as well. But Cooley is a law firm, and I see one of our clients over there, and some of you over here as well.
Isn't it the law firm?
It is.
It's not just a law firm, it's the law firm.
We're the #1 law firm when it comes to VC financings and IPOs. So we can claim the #1 thing. But we work with startups like at the earliest stages all the way through to IPO. We also work with the big tech public companies. So you'll probably see us on one side of the deal or another. And I'm not an attorney platform person for about 3 years at various funds. And the cool thing is that at Cooley, I basically do the same things for our clients. I do a lot to help them with investor intros, looking at their pitch decks, and just kind of coaching and supporting them along the process. And I think that's something really special to me.
And we have, I know I saw Andy from Stifel.
I'm Andy from Stifel. Stifel is a venture bank that focuses on lending and banking startups and the funds that are behind them. You know, I would say the biggest thing to kind of remember is that there were 50 people that came from SVB prior to, so a lot of new platform. There's a lot of, I was a former SVB, basically round 2 of SVB.
Thank you. And we have the team from KPMG here.
Brad Heyman, I'm a managing director at KPMG. Similar to their speeches, we work with companies in audit, tax, advisory, and by nature an accounting, but we we help companies go through their life cycle from early phase as early as possible. That's the point I want to make sure. We very early in their life cycle, all the way through IPO readiness, public company time frame. We also work on the other side, VC backed, or with the VC venture funds as well. So glad to be here. Thank you, Charlie Brown.
One thing I would say for some of the service providers that, names that have been around a bit, I think there's a tendency when you're sort of starting out with a fund to work with the new venture-backed, whatever it is, the automated, the fancy website and all this sort of stuff. And I have found that a lot of those folks are not as in the industry for as long and their teams. And so, all of the folks who work at the service providers who are helping us out today, histories in the community in New York. So when you are looking to build out a network, whether it's for fundraising, whether it's for connections, like I have gotten deals that I have done from Cooley, from banking partners. So, it's not just, how much yields can I get on my, sweet account, which was, maybe 4.2 goes on top of that, right? And that's cool, and that's important, right? But like Brad from Stifel was my banker when I first started my fund, and as knows everybody in the community. So those relationships are really important too. Cool. All right, moving right on. We have some speakers. We have a panel, and we will get right to it. And but first, I will have Mike Cole.
Hey everyone, my name is Cole. I work at a venture capital fund here in the city called Galaxy Interactive. It's a part of a broader merchant bank called Galaxy Digital. Our fund specifically focuses on digital media, gaming, and infrastructure supporting a digital experience. We just closed our third fund around this time last year, so we're at around 900 million AUM. I joined about 4 years ago and I wear a couple of different hats. I'm our chief of staff, which kind of means pretty needed to me, working hand in hand with our general partner on our team, talent, working a lot with our portfolio, a lot on biz dev fundraising. And then I also serve on our deal team. So really you need deal that keys across, I'm across. And so found to play those different roles within this fund and my previous fund, scaling different firms and also helping scale in a portfolio company. So really appreciate Charlie helping me out and excited to talk a bit more about the experience there.
Hi everyone, my name is Aaron. Thanks to Charlie and the sponsors for having us today. I'm a VP on the investment team at a fund called Roadso. We're a global multi-stage fund, around $4 billion in AUM. We're investing out of our 10th fund. and we lead rounds from pre-IPO to from pre-seed to pre-IPO, which checks out to 50 million. We're a generalist fund, and we invest across sectors and geographies. Since we're talking about recruiting, just for some context, I started off my career in banking, did some time in investment research at a PE fund, and then worked at a startup called Cloud Kitchen. We're going to about 4 years.
Hi everyone, I'm Beth Ferreira, and I am leading Serena Ventures. It's a fund founded by Serena Williams in 2021. And prior to this, I was at First Mark Capital for a bunch of years. And I guess prior to that, I was at WME Ventures. So I have a lot of experience recruiting and building teams. And then just like an aside, I was the 12th employee at Etsy, and I was the COO of App.com. So have a lot of experience.
So she's the one you actually want to listen to.
I mean, there's so many jobs. I've worked in banking, I worked in consulting, and I worked with Fred at Flatiron Partners, which is his fund before Union Square Ventures.
So, team structures and how what the fund does dictates or influences like just what kind of structure you have, because you've seen all the VC fund websites. Some of them have platforms, some of them have lots of senior people, some of them have lots of junior people. Is there kind of a best setup, and what are the inputs? And I'm curious to go down the line, and Beth, we'll start with you. What is it about Serena Ventures that dictates sort of how you want to structure your team? And how are you thinking about that relative to what kind of investments you want to make?
Yeah. So I think in many cases, people like to think that there's a lot of leverage from different layers in the organization. And my experience has been having a direct one-to-one relationship. So if I'm the partner, having someone who can help be a thought partner, do a lot of the analysis, and be there for the entire process of the deal, including once you've done the deal, supporting the company afterwards. This is a great training tool. So, you see the reps over and over again, and you also get to own the junior person gets to own the entire process. So, ultimately this is an apprenticeship business, and you need to affect, and there's never one situation that's exactly like the other, but we're like pulling from the other experiences to make decisions about the current situation. So that's how I'm thinking about it. We just hired a partner to join us, and she started last week, and ideally that's what it'd be in like the structure.
Yeah, so for us, our structure is I think a little bit different, and I think there are a lot of like pros and cons. I'll frame it more for like aspiring investors and kind of how to think about what is the right fit for you. But for us, we have a generalist model. We work across sectors and across stages and across geographies, and so we have a sort of a junior investor pool that works across the partnership. I think the pros and cons of that are like under the sort of one-to-one model, you get a lot more direct apprenticeship experience. But the flip side is you really learn from one investor. And I think there are trade-offs to being able to learn from multiple investors and seeing how different people think about businesses and what they like and don't like, and taking kind of what you agree and disagree with from each of them.
Yeah, bro, what if you get stuck with the asshole partner?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you guys have a staffer?
We actually don't. And so I think it's something that you learn to navigate, and that becomes more of like a soft politic thing, I would say. Like every firm will have its dynamic. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Staffer is someone who helps manage the workflow from the junior people to the senior people. And how many partners do you have?
We have
So there's a lot of partners. So, right, and there's, deals are on fire. So what happens when you're working on a hot deal and then someone else pulls someone else in?
So for us, it's usually there's like a core deal team of like a partner and a non-partner, and then they kind of own the initial deal construction process, and they'll sort of decide together like whether or not there are more resources. I think we're actually quite good at making that a collaborative decision. It's not always like the managing partner that dictates whether or not the deal team has 2 or 3 or 4 people. I think that like we have like 15 to 20 investors globally, and so we're at the point where it's easy enough to manage that without like a formal process. I think that if you look at a fund that has more investors than us, that's when you start to deal with like true staffing processes.
You want to jump in with how you guys are structured and thinking about what that means to the org?
Yeah. So I appreciate getting a chance to kind of share the perspective I've gained so far. I've been doing venture work for about 7 years, so certainly, some experience, a lot left to learn, but it has been cool to be a part of a couple of different structures already, and then just see how, I don't know, before, I guess, getting into VC, it can be a little opaque, and I think that there's maybe a reason for that, is that every fund does it a little bit differently. Everyone has a different philosophy of, you mentioned, like, different team structures, like, there are funds that believe platform is a core part of their offering, but even platform is defined in so many different ways. There are funds that very proudly put out thought leadership pieces about why platform is bullshit, right? And it's, I think that for me at least, so for our fund, we have two venture funds underneath the Galaxy banner. We have kind of a more crypto-focused venture fund, and then we have Galaxy Interactive, my fund, which is more about kind of digital media, gaming, infrastructure, that sort of thing. Our venture fund, or the crypto venture fund, has a more traditional platform structure where we have a head of platform, we have a talent lead, a wonderful colleague of mine who's here now actually. That works incredibly well for them. They tend to be investing in very early stage organizations, like they're doing more like kind of true pre-seed and seed, which itself is kind of an amorphous thing. What that means, there's no formal definition as we all know, but it kind of does dictate, at least from what I've seen, the structure of how a fund tries to attack the opportunity set. So for them, because they have these very early stage companies that may not have themselves any form of a formal marketing team or any form of a formal recruiting team, having these actual seats within the fund affords those companies access to resources that they maybe wouldn't be able to afford on their own. For us, we're investing a little bit later, like maybe call it later seed, A rounds, companies that are a little bit more mature. Our philosophy is that, we try to be honest about what we can actually provide that is differentiated. And what we've decided is that that's typically maybe like either talent, but not necessarily in a generalized way, more so like at the executive level, talking to our CEOs that were on the boards of it saying, where are your gaps and where maybe you can, when you've got your head down building, if nothing else beyond the check, maybe we have our head up constantly trying to make connections on your behalf. So maybe we can get you in the room with a prospective hire that you wouldn't have been able to, maybe that you would have been able to find, but you just didn't have the time to find. Or maybe you just didn't have the exact right connection. It would have taken 2 introductions versus we could just put you right in front of them. And then the other thing, I guess, is kind of business development. Because we're surveying the landscape constantly, you've got a decent sense maybe of different customers. Maybe there are pilots with one company that could be relevant for another company. So I guess we view it in a more kind of bespoke manner at the stage that we're playing, and also just being honest with ourselves that, like, whereas maybe a group like Westcap has a lot of resources and an amazing kind of operating system platform team, we kind of approach it more as we've got our investment team and we've got our non-investment team. And the part of the job of the investment team wholesale is to support the companies however we possibly can. And so it's kind of that bespoke model. Is it talent? Is it business development? And then are we helping them put rounds together, especially keeping the companies capitalized? Are we helping them put rounds together with other investors? Because, again, if nothing else, at least we're constantly talking with co-investors, we're constantly talking with our own LPs and allocators who want direct allocation to certain growth rounds. So yeah, I guess stage is important in determining what the team's gonna look like, but also just found that every fund has a different philosophy as to what is or is not value additive in their strategy.
One comment I'll make is mention the term leverage, and I think that's an important way to think about like intentionally designing a firm is where does adding one person get you more than one person's worth of output and where there's blockers. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's sort of a perfect model, but I know lots of instances where the presence of junior folks in a process makes the process just slower. Where the junior folks feel like mini versions of the GP that can't make a decision, so you got to do the whole song and dance with them, and then maybe they pass it on to somebody else, and you sort of do the whole song and dance again. On the other side, I know people that I'm co-invested with and partners that have no junior people. The partners are unresponsive. People like can't make a decision. They're always unprepared for every meeting. It's a total disaster. And I will tell them, like, you need some help. Like, you are clearly managing too many things, like 10 minutes late to the board meeting and all of that sort of stuff, right? So it's like, where in your particular firm would some help? It doesn't necessarily have to be junior, but where are you struggling with their blockers? And that's different for every firm. Aaron, I'm going to start with you because you still have it. You're hired.
Yes, that's right. We're recruiting for an associate. So if you think you'd be a good fit, or if you have candidates in mind, please send them our way.
So I'd love to understand the earliest part of the process and just like where the idea comes that you might need to hire someone, how you start to think about like what should the profile be, because a lot of the folks in the room are maybe trying to get a sense of like, how do I know if a firm is even hiring? And, how do I, get into that process before it becomes a big, whole thing? So what's the sort of beginning part of that, the process?
Yeah. First of all, I want to shout out to Charlie because he's my career coach and we actually talked a lot about this over the last couple of months. I think there are a couple of things that lead to the hiring process beginning. For example, raising a new fund is a very common one because you have a lot of capital you need to deploy and there's just typically more work to do. Other times, if you look at firms like ours or kind of the ones that have more headcount, there is some sort of rough cadence. So it's not that we recruit a new investor every X years, but typically that is kind of true. I think like the real answer from the inside is like, for us at least, we wait until it feels like the team is really stretched thin. And so we start thinking about what it means to add leverage and capacity. And so for us, we felt that over the last year or two, we really, started to compete in high quality deals. And we're trying to increase like baseline coverage. Because so much of our work is focused on thesis work and DD. And so then you start to think about, hey, what are the strengths that the team already has? And then what are the things that we actually lack a lot and how can we bring in folks that complement our existing skill sets while still maintaining the core culture?
So if I'm poking around outside the Nordstone, I'm, pinging you going like, hey, how stressed are you guys? Pretty stressed? I'm looking to see what background you have and saying, there might be an opening there.
Yeah, so actually from like the candidate's perspective, I think that I don't know if the other candidates would agree or not, but I think it's actually less about trying to like catch the fund at the right point in time, and it's more like a long burn. This gets a little bit into like, I guess, recruiting strategy, but fundamentally the role of like investor outside like portfolio work is like a lot of sourcing and selection. And so to the extent that you can start doing proxies for that, whether that's going to events, meeting companies and sending them to investors or writing really good thought pieces, and then just like building that relationship over time. I think for us, it's, there are people who have clearly been trying to build a relationship with us months or years in advance, and that is so much more powerful than, cold emailing or getting in touch at like the exact right moment in time when we haven't been.
So you kind of had a little bit of a list when you started. There were people that were like in your orbit that had been at least trying to build a relationship with you. Beth, you guys tried Charlotte, right? I'm curious, like, at some point you say, I need someone. How did she get on your short list?
So I interviewed a lot. This is a big role and, you don't want to make a mistake.
So you interviewed a lot of people. So where did you even get the names to interview?
I asked everyone. I mean, I didn't put out a spec, but I asked everyone I knew, who are the like one or two like best people in house. Yes. And a lot of people that are in jobs. So, I'm also pitching, why do you want to leave your like very great firm to come, work with us at this, more startup-y fund? And I'd say, I would say for the partner role, there was a lot more great candidates that I'm seeing. We're also hiring associates, so if anyone has any leads, than the associate pool right now. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but yeah, so Charlotte was actually a really easy transition, like easy interview because one, she was check her out very easily. I knew about her, but I'd never met her. And, she referenced really well from founders, she referenced really well from, her previous firms. So that made, and she was here in New York and we wanted to be together. And she literally, she started last week and she hit the ground running. We were able to check all of that stuff out. And she's coming into something that's, a little bit, we're not completely buttoned up yet. Like there's a little bit of chaos going on. So, we're still putting structure around it. But it was also, the biggest piece is that I needed to interview for someone who had the aptitude to be a startup, like in and of itself, right? And so, not only just to work with startups, but to also be, she just had that inclination to do that. So there was it's almost an intangible thing, and this is a very hard thing to interview for, but it's like, you want to come in, we're creating the structure, we're going to be augmenting the structure over time, that kind of thing.
I totally agree with something that you said, which is outside of the folks that have been intentionally building a relationship with us, the best candidates that we get are referrals. And I think from the flip side, that's also why the sort of long burn is really important, because we get a lot of referral from investors at other firms who's like, hey, this person has been really trying hard to build a relationship with me. We're just not hiring anytime soon, so you should really consider this person. And I think those are like great sources.
Yeah, I should say, I wanted to make sure that we were expanding the net as far as we could, because the problem is, your network is only so big, right? And so I didn't want it to be totally insular. So I did a lot of LinkedIn outreach as well to people, from different parts of the country, different types of firms. And, I was lucky. Most of them talked to me, but it's great that also now I know a whole bunch more, interesting people.
One of the other things I'll point out too is the reference list. And if you think about your job search and try to figure out who's your reference list going to be? One of my other coaching clients brought in a deal to her firm, and building a track record is clearly important. And then I asked her, so this is exciting because now I get to talk about board stuff. And she's a senior associate, and she said, what do you need? I said, well, you're going to be on the board, right? She's like, nobody said anything about that. Just handed the deal to the partner, which is sort of very commonplace. So you got to be in those board meetings, because at some point you're going to interview with somebody like Beth, and Beth's going to want to know who can speak to your presence on a board and who can reference you when you want to have companies. While many of you are probably out there hunting down deals and sending them to the folks on this panel, if that introduction is the last time you talk to that founder, the last time you help that founder, how great a reference is that? Reference is going to be, oh yeah, they made the intro to also that, did senior MIA, and that's it. That's not going to be as great a reference to somebody that you've actually continued to work for and help. Cole, how did the process start? Did you have people that were already sort of floating around?
Yeah, so I guess to Aaron's point, and again with this maybe broader perspective that at least I have, that more than you might think, every venture fund to some extent is more startup than maybe they like to admit. You have, and there's a whole spectrum there, right? You certainly have institutions that have been doing this for quite some time, quite successfully, where it might look more akin to a banking situation or a consulting situation where you do have analyst pools, let's say, right? And there's kind of a hierarchy that you follow a process, and if you're successful in that process, at some point, maybe there's an opportunity to level into that partner role, that GP role down the line. Especially these days, because there are so many different funds with so many different specialties, areas of focus, operational perspectives, track records as GPs, let's say. Everyone is figuring out, I think, what works best for them and concurrently figuring out what kind of team works best for them. I think maybe the rule of thumb is that, generally speaking, if a role becomes available, whether it's formally posted on a job site or just the inkling, you have a partner pinging her network saying, hey, I'm thinking about this kind of person. I need some capacity here or there. Usually you as a prospective part of that team are coming in to either, well, maybe not either or, but to add leverage to things that matter to that GP, or potentially take something or some things off the plate of the people currently doing those things. And so I guess building your profile and your point of view on just an ongoing basis is probably the best way that you can just equip yourself to be ready if and when the moment arrives, where you've got your resume, and it's an iterative thing, right? But you've got your resume ready to go, highlighting the kinds of things that matter to you, right? That this perspective, at least, and this is kind of what I would like to think was helpful in finding where I'm at now with Interactive, was a point of view of what kind of work would I like to be doing? Do I have a strong perspective on it? And this wasn't necessarily just an investment thesis, but certainly if that's the kind of role that you want to be in, then just having a strong perspective, a flexible but strong perspective on the fields that you think you'd like to be covering. But just what kind of work do I want to do? What kind of, what is my day-to-day? And certainly we can all get into the details of what a day-to-day might look like at different roles within a venture fund. And so, then what you're doing, I guess, is building yourself and building your own sort of conviction around who you are, what the next step might look like for you. And then it's really just kind of seeing the landscape with those conversations of, hey, here's who I am, here's what I care about, here's what value I can bring based on what I've done, here's the perspective I want to bring to the table if I were a part of your team. And what you'll find is, the worst case scenario generally is just an interesting conversation with a new friend, a new contact. And if the moment is right, which sometimes it is, suddenly there's traction. Oh my goodness, we're having a conversation about what it might look like to fill a seat on this this particular team. Or how it often goes, maybe more often, is like, what a productive conversation with that person who clearly has a sense of what they'd like to do next. Maybe they should talk to this person from my network or this person from my network, and then your name is kind of out there to your point. And then, when the moment is right, when that need becomes apparent, or when the job is posted, you're already on someone's mind. And, then it's kind of this, like, you'll find that fit once you've established, maybe what it is you are and what it is you're looking for. So, like, you'll meet that moment in a prepared and kind of formed way.
On the point of view part, I think it's also point of view on how the work gets done too. Not just like, I think AI is going to be big. But like, if you're trying to get a job doing sourcing, having a point of view of like, actually my hack for sourcing is I go to these, big events and I see who the first people to leave are, because those are people who care about their time. And if they don't find that the event is useful, they move on to the next thing. And like, that's my little trick for finding the best people. Well, I don't know if that's the committee or not. But like, that kind of thing is a perspective on how to do the job of sourcing. And you want to talk to people who are good at that task and figure out like, oh, the way I'm going to wind up doing sourcing is this, that, and the other.
I just wanted to add one thing. When we're recruiting for venture, it's a much more sensitive job search than a typical company. I know someone who is a partner at a firm, took a call with another firm, and someone at that firm back channeled her to her existing firm. And so, like we just have to, when you back channel, you have to be careful about where you're back.
And also make sure the people at your own firm understand that the process is confidential.
Exactly.
That sucks. I'm curious about the skill sets that you're optimizing for. Whether it's feeling like the person has a big network, whether it's the ability to filter or research or pick. I always found it sort of strange that folks would inbound to me. One, I never wanted to hire anybody, so I don't know why they would inbound me. But also like sending me companies, and I'm like, well, you don't know that if I were to hire anybody, that like picking is the thing that you would be, and I think it's, you're not going to have as good a picking ability as somebody who's been in the industry for 10 years. So I would want them to stand out for other reasons. But what were you guys optimizing for?
So is this a junior partner?
That's a good question.
Yeah. So I'll start with junior. So I'm optimizing for the ability to think and be able to learn. So, and we're just looking for, before you get to venture, indications of that. So they have worked with large data sets and have had to make decisions without complete information. Consultants do this all the time. And so they generally are very good at this. Someone who might have a year or two at a startup, so they have like empathy and understand sort of what it takes to build a company. So as they're evaluating the companies, they can understand a little bit better, like what kind of questions do I ask? What are the red flags? That kind of thing. But ultimately, we want to get to a place where that individual is going to be at least somewhat a decent picker, so that the pipeline that we're spending time on is a good pipeline. So right now, we actually have way too many good deals in the pipeline right now, and that like spread really thin. But we need to be able to like funnel that. After not investing for a really long time. But like my point is that we're not doing a good job right now focusing our time on a few things, and that's what we need.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. At the junior level, I think, there are fundamental traits like high IQ hustle that are super important, but if you have that, you'll probably be successful in most things you try. I think the more specific things that we try to screen for and test for, I think one is deep curiosity. I think there's a very clear difference when you speak to candidates about either businesses or just things that they're very interested in, and the depth at which they organically go into and research those things is something that powers you and gives you persistence when you're looking at a couple of things that are not that interesting, and what drives you to go find the next really interesting thing. And then it also sort of gives you the drive to say, hey, I really want to learn how to select that. The other thing that I'd say we would also try to screen for is competitiveness. I think at the end of the day, in the long term, most people who are really successful are very competitive. For us, there's a balance of trying to find people who are both competitive externally but very collaborative internally, and that is sometimes harder to find. But I would say those are the things that we really try to look for.
Yeah, I think definitely in agreement with my other panelists. I think it's very rule dependent, and again, like, I don't mean to make it sound so opaque, but just, and maybe that's part of sort of the whatever, the competitiveness, the hustle, the creativity is, in a similar way to if you are looking to be in an investor seat, right? And if you're going to reach conviction on a prospective investment, part of your job is, with as much determination and creativity as possible, reach an answer on that company, right? Like, have you properly diligenced the opportunity? Do you know what you're underwriting, what you're going to use other people's money to invest in with the hope that there's going to be crazy returns down the line? I guess I would say, and there's a lot to this, but maybe taking a similar approach to the firms or the places that you're trying to work. What kind of roles do you think they're hiring for? Do they have a sense of their needs? Because no organization is perfect, right? Like, you talk to founders in the portfolio where they'll identify X, Y, and Z as prospective hiring needs, but then after a couple of board meetings, they're like, oh, but have you considered A, B, and C? And maybe not, because, everyone has blind spots. No one knows everything all the time. And so having that similar, I think, determination at understanding the landscape of places you're looking to work, especially in venture where it is so fluid and every firm has a slightly different perspective on how they do this thing. So maybe they just raised a fund, to Aaron's point. Probably there's going to be some capacity needs, right? There's a lot of great deals in the pipeline. We're probably going to need people who are going to be able to get their hands dirty, put on their diligence hat, and go to work and evaluating opportunities. Does it seem like the GP of this fund I'm looking to work for is the one actually on all the boards and seems to be the one sourcing all the deals? Maybe they're not necessarily going to be so impressed by the fact that, oh, I know all these founders, which is great, but maybe if they've been doing this for a while and I'm kind of, trying to come in as more like an associate or VP level investor, maybe what they're not looking for is, oh my God, is this person who's been doing this for way less than I have a network that blows me out of the water? It's probably not. But I need them to sit next to me, learn from me, connect to my network, and help me get the most leverage out of my network. Maybe that's what they're looking for. And yeah, I guess just being a detective and really not just learning the portfolio enough that you can kind of reference companies and what you think they do when you're doing an interview or even kind of a coffee chat. Like, get into the weeds, right? Like, oh, they just raised a round, but it seems like there's been a lot of layoffs recently. Maybe that company's not doing so hot. Oh, that GP is on the board of that company. Oh, I've got a sense of what their position in that company looks like. That better succeed for them to return that fund, to have the hope to raise fund 3. So maybe I can use my expertise in that field as that's the first thing I'm showing up with, the value. Oh, if you consider X, Y, or Z, or oh, I know about, it's a cybersec company. I know this is the field I'm in. I can help bring an edge day one where, in a vacuum, you might think, oh, it's all about showing my network and my sourcing. But actually, in that moment, that partner needed someone who could help get their hands dirty with this big portfolio company that if it doesn't succeed, well, then the rest of the fund doesn't succeed. So just kind of having that, hungry diligence approach to the funds you're looking at, the same way that you would expect an investor to when they're evaluating an investment opportunity.
That's a good switch gears of vetting the funds when you're on the other side as a candidate too. And along the lines of being a detective, when you brought up they just raised a fund. Well, actually most funds announce well after they have actually raised, right? So if you're just reading off of that, venture capital journal announcement that somebody raised it, that was 9 months ago, actually, and they've already probably hired. But somebody who pokes around, I can't tell you how many people who are trying to get jobs at venture funds never ever talk to anybody on the limited partner side. And just don't understand the ecosystem enough to be actually, junior folks at fund of funds see all of the pitch decks, they know who they just invested in, they think it's cool to talk to people in venture. I used to be that, I was at the General Motors pension fund, I was a junior person there. Nobody wanted to talk to me. So if somebody was like, hey, do you want to come and shoot the shit about what VC funds you're doing and who's interesting and who might be hiring, they're a wealth of knowledge and no one reaches out to sort of vet the funds. And there might be some minefields there, right? You might be saying, hey, I'm interviewing so-and-so, and they're like, oh yeah, we're probably not going to be one to be in a puddle in your resume. You want to know about that. So what other ways can I vet a fund so that I'm not spending time somewhere that's going to be a disaster a year from now?
People that work there or have worked there and get the sense of the culture, how they incorporate team members in the process, what they learn, do they have autonomy, do they not have autonomy? Do they expect you to be in your seat from 8 to 6 and not be out networking or doing very little networking, or is that like the expectation? How does that fit? Because there's multiple ways to do this job, and you got to figure out which one fits you. Also, getting a really good understanding of like what the job is. This job is very sexy on the outside, but there's a lot of times like, and particularly in my last firm, I did 2 deals a year, maybe 3. And so what are you doing all those times? Like you're kissing a lot of frogs, and you're not doing deals. You might lose a deal because it's super competitive out there. And so like, is that something I want to do? And how does the firm what does the firm do with their time, and how do they think about that?
Yeah, I think talking particularly to like ex-employees is probably the most truthful answer you'll get. Because if you're working at incentives at play. I do think that like actually broadly networking is helpful too. I know it's kind of like a trope that I keep saying, but like when I was recruiting, I was lucky enough to have friends who were already in the venture ecosystem, and hearing from them that like nerds, it seems like the people at Nerds are very happy whenever they catch up with them. They're doing interesting deals. It seems like they're doing well. Like that was actually a really important signal. And a lot of what I heard from my friends is actually kind of true. And so I would say that's probably the other way. I think there are some things like, for example, like funds, like most funds who consistently raise funds are doing it every 3 to 4 years. So if you like look on like a PitchBook or something like that, or you just like when their last fund was announced, you kind of like back into it. But those are, I think less important.
Or LinkedIn. I mean, like go and check LinkedIn and see, is there consistently junior people leaving or partners leaving, and get to the bottom of that.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's like the references of current and former employees. I mean, that's going to tell you everything because they've been in there. Charlie's point is spot on. It's an ecosystem, right? And every part plays its role. Venture, from where I sit, and it seems like if you're doing your job exceptionally well, you're a very effective broker or middleman between massive pools of capital that exist in this world and startups that maybe wouldn't have access to it otherwise. So if you're doing your job exceptionally well, and I think you should take pride, like you're an effective broker or middleman to try to help, support and capitalize businesses that, have a chance to do something really big or a chance to do something really cool. Just because for that massive allocator, and the analyst on that team, it wouldn't be a good use of their time to try to survey the landscape of pre-seed startups. And you as the VC, depending on your stage, your job really is to be kind of the eyes and ears on behalf of that capital, if you will. And there's a lot of information out there, like people will just put it out there in press releases, but it's also not so hard to find when, on LinkedIn posts, for example, a lot of folks, when they raise a new fund, they'll tag some of the bigger LPs that are okay with them mentioning that they're there. Go on LinkedIn, find, some associates or analysts or VPs or directors or whatever. If you have more than 15 mutual connections, I don't know, I feel like it'd be pretty shameless. Connect, maybe write a little note as to why you want to connect. I feel like you'll still get like a 75% hit rate if you, write a thoughtful note. And the worst they can do is ignore the connection request, right? You're not going to offend anyone by saying, hey, I'd like to chat with you about this particular thing. And yeah, like at the allocator level, that's maybe the hidden layer that people don't realize until they get into it, which is like, especially at like partner levels, a huge part of your job is capitalizing the fund itself, making sure that there are resources available to run your business. And so the folks at the LP level, at the allocator level, like in the same way that maybe venture VCs, their job is to survey the company and startup landscape, these allocators, their job is to survey the fund landscape. So they're going to have perspectives that even GPs might not necessarily have or be willing to share.
That's an important thing that people don't realize too. If you're going to make a partner one day, you have to have relationships to money. Ultimately, you're going to be responsible for bringing money into the firm. That was a big miss when in the beginning of my career, I was at the General Motors Pension Fund. We were investing in both venture and in private equity. So I used to sit down, like, I've been in a meeting with Steve Schwartzman before. I've been in a meeting with, the partners at TDG and Apollo and all this other stuff. I didn't want to be a buyout person. I was like, I'm not going to network with any of these people. These are the folks whose family offices now go into these venture funds. Like, those would have been great relationships for me to build. And I never liked the idea of, like, only connecting to someone because they have money. But occasionally, some of those people were halfway decent people that I wanted to actually network with and stay in touch with. And I realized that when I met Emma Sokolov, who is now working at Lake House and worked a little bit at Shine. And the name really struck me. And I was like, wait, is your dad in private equity? She's like, yeah. It's like, I met your dad like 20 years ago. It was Parker Leonard Green. It's a firm that like had Whole Foods. Nicest guy. Like I was a 24-year-old little peon from, pension fund, and he took a meeting with me. I was trying to get to know their fund. Super gracious. A couple times I bounced emails back and forth. Didn't really hold on to that relationship, right? Like that would have been a good relationship when I went to go raise my first fund, and he really didn't know who I was from home, right? And because I didn't hold on to that relationship and ping him every now and then, if I was on the West Coast, and I'd build that up over time. And that's really important too. If you're, it's one thing to break into venture, but another thing to say, okay, 10 years from now, I'm going to be a partner and you need to source people. So like, I should build up my high net worth family office relationships over time. I want to get audience questions, but I want to ask a quick, maybe sort of lightning question about traditional versus non-traditional backgrounds. And if you have a preference, do I need to do the 2 years in banking, or can I have sort of a startup-y entrepreneurial, background, and is there one that's better or worse?
Depends. Typically, more traditional has been where I've had the most success.
So now I'm going to ruin the lightning round. Just know a little bit about, for example, how FirstMark works. Like FirstMark culture is like researchy, like some of the folks are from that background, and it was a little more formalized than necessarily like how things used to work when I was at USB, when it was like me, Brad, and Fred. I don't think we wrote a report, and the reports for Fred's blog. I mean, that was like, essentially how it worked. Right? So it's sort of a function of the types of environments that you have.
It is, but I think there's also a level of scrutiny on the funds that we need to document our work, right? On the institutional level. So if we, if had a different investor base, then maybe it could be. Right. And I also think if you had the best situation, you would have a combination. But sometimes you don't have enough seats for that.
Any other comments on one versus the other?
I was gonna say it's a combined answer, but I think the best is both, because you learn so much from it. You learn how to work really hard, how to look at a bunch of different businesses from banking, consulting, but it's very hierarchical. You need to kind of unlearn that and become much more self-driven. Thanks for a good example of that, and taking a bigger step back. This job is all about taking risk, and if you leave a cushy banking job and sacrifice going into private equity to take a big pay cut so that you can be a part of something, that's a really important.
Yeah, I guess to maybe an earlier point, just if you're being brought on to a team, generally speaking, you're there to add capacity or leverage to things that are important to that team, or potentially take things off the plate of people who are I need to allocate my time and resources elsewhere. Maybe more senior folks are making that decision. And so maybe at junior levels, I was in consulting before this, I found that just being able to manage a project from end to end, basically just to a boss, show that I can be given a thing and do the thing, was kind of a helpful indicator that, hey, as a junior member of your team, if you give me a thing, I'll do that thing.
It'll be
right. Yeah, it'll be done. I sometimes just the consulting thing for me at least, and I know people make amazing careers out of it and I think with anything, as you get more senior, it naturally becomes more entrepreneurial. I know just because I get to work at a lot of our capital formation these days, fundraising is an entrepreneurial endeavor. It's relationship building, it's creative, it's right time, right place, right narrative, why you, why now, that. And so as you move up the food chain, so to speak, maybe that's where the entrepreneurial mindset is a necessity, because if you're, the managing partner of a fund, you are an entrepreneur. But yeah, maybe at the more junior levels, we found that just kind of having that baseline, more kind of traditional training in things like banking, law, finance, or consulting, it's helpful because it's, hey, if I give you a thing to do, will you do it? It doesn't have to be perfect, but will it get done? And kind of trust that it's getting done.
Everybody's going to start out in spreadsheets.
I mean, yeah, and guess what? You live there your whole life.
I want to make sure I get some questions from the audience. So 1, 2, 3.
Hi, my name is Sydney, and I was wondering, thank you for the panel, and I was wondering why a lot of funds I've seen are very top-heavy or bottom-heavy. So why are there very few principals and VPs at a lot of funds, and is that going towards a certain kind of trend?
Yeah. Is there a trend?
I'm wondering.
I don't know, that there's fewer. I think, firms only have a certain amount of And so you want to have as many people who can make decisions on that in that realm as you can. And I think it's hard because there's a lot of expectations when you hire someone who is, especially a lateral hire into a VP or principal level, that they will become a partner. And if you look at these firms that have 5 or 10 VPs, none of them, I shouldn't say no, not all of them are going to become partners. Like there's not partner track for all of them, and then probably only. So you have to think about like, excuse me, think about like, it's like, do you want to, is that the kind of firm that you want to experience? And for me personally, when I worked in venture early, I saw that. I was like, I'm never going to go through the process. And at firms, a lot of firms don't promote from within. So I knew if I wanted to be in venture, I had to somehow come in as a partner.
But by the way, there are a lot of principals at firms, but they're little b partners. Like you've seen a firm website where like everyone's a partner. And it's partly the fact that like when you outbound, everyone's been told to only talk to partners, so they just sort of feel like anybody who can do a deal, we should call a partner. But there's a difference between like the general partners of the firm who might have 20% of the carry and the person who has been promoted to partner, who by the way like can do it. Right, but they are much earlier in their career, where I would say like 10 years ago, they might have been at a principal. When I was at First Round Capital, there were 4 partners and 4 principals, and it was kind of awkward. Because it was pretty obvious that there were never going to be 8 partners there, right? So it was like competition. Are we all working towards the one partner slot? Who's going to stay? Who's going to go? And that has sort of worked itself out. Like 3 of the folks in that group, I mean, we're all gotten accredited, but like they went off and did their own separate things and whatever. So there's just, you shouldn't have a one-to-one relationship between partners and principals, because the principal basically are not going to have anywhere else to go. So they have to get out. So, and then you're going to notice that as you're a founder. You get an investment from a principal at a firm where there's clearly no upside for them. They're going to leave, and then you're going to be like an orphaned founder. That happens a lot too.
So Charlie mentioned an interesting thing, that some junior talent can actually improve things and, reduce the workload that some increase. I wonder if you guys are optimizing for AI-driven mindset, like for various roles, like from junior to more senior roles, and how exactly on a practical level you identify someone actually has that AI-driven mindset and reducing the workload?
Because we're a small fund, are really thinking a lot about this. We're testing on how to like get our investment memos to like 60 to 80% and that kind of thing. But I think it's the intellectual curiosity that you mentioned before. AI is continuously changing, so we need to be not only reading about it, but testing it and seeing our companies test it and like figure things out. So I mean that's probably more what we're looking for than someone who's like an AI expert. That said, there are schools that have AI majors, and we have an intern coming this summer who is an AI major.
So we'll check that out at the end.
I guess just echoing that, especially as it's still so nascent as to like what is the efficacy of this tool versus that tool in a workflow, still kind of proving out what is or is not going to be not just scalable but sustainable, and actually kind of bringing value or capacity to your process. What better way to figure it out than to do it, to experiment it? And so yeah, if we're talking with a candidate where feels like most anything vis-a-vis research, writing, communications, there can be an AI component to it. Talking with someone about how have you been experimenting? Show us some of your workflow. Let's get a sense of where are the gaps that you're still seeing, because even still that can identify where there might be market opportunities. And so I guess it's not the most complicated. Maybe it's quite simple, if not, simple and easy are 2 different things. Pretty simple maybe that someone who's actually trying it as opposed to just thinking about trying it, usually we'll preference that person.
I'll open one more question that came over here. But just very quickly across the row, for anyone here who didn't get a chance to talk to you extensively or just wants to sort of follow along and stay in touch, what is your preferred method for like that relationship building, kind of staying around the room?
My email, Beth@serenaventures.com.
Actually, I do have an email address that you're over. Everyone knows about for a long time. Details over to your personal email address.
Yeah, same. Aaron Edwards of it.
At 3 for 3, it's just Colt.Mora at Galaxy.com.
So, especially Beth, you mentioned that you hired a partner very recently, and you also said something about joining as a partner from outside. So my question is, how would you approach in general hiring a partner, right? If you want as a merchant firm to get a new partner, obviously that person should have a lot of experience, obviously like not just, a junior person, and obviously it should be probably under the radar kind of confidential search. How would you even approach such a person?
That's the trick, yeah. I mean, you could put a spec out, but that's, that's going to be a lot to sort of serve through. I think the first question you have to ask is like, what kind of firm are we? So are we a bunch of operators who have deep expertise in certain areas, and what do we need to bring in? Like, what are the skills we need to bring in? Or the opposite, we are a bunch of generalist investors, and we want to get more specific. I want to get the AI experience or the healthcare experience on the team. So that's the first decision to make. But the second is like, this is like a marriage and a dance. And so, I mean, there's no dating sites for this, but it's kind of like that. So being very specific about what you're looking for.
Being a partner, end-to-end process should at least.
So problem there that's probably just interviews is not enough to give somebody a piece of a GP, right? And a big role and like a title, right? So how would you approach trial period or something?
Well, if you're pulling someone out of a job, it's hard to give them a trial period. So that's the tricky part. If they're not in a job, that's something that's pretty much easier to do. But I think it's like also you're leveraging, you give them a piece, but they still have to earn, there's a path to earn into the carry. And so the partnership needs to see that over time, this is what it's going to look like for you. What's number of quality deals sourced? Are you going to expect people to have DPI before having an increased amount of carry? Are there certain markups at a certain time? Like that kind of thing. But I think that particularly for someone that might not have as much experience, putting those guardrails on it and being very upfront about it.
Thank you very much for spending time with us this morning. Thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah, wait, actually,